The sound was what I remember first. Not shouting, not accusations, a chair leg dragging across concrete. That slow, grinding scrape of cheap plastic on workshop floor, the sound a person makes when they stand up knowing they've been caught, and their body moves before their brain decides what to do with their face. I was sitting at my desk in the back office of my own factory, watching 4 people I had fed, trained, and trusted for the better part of a decade try to figure out which one of them was going to speak first. None of them did. That was fine. I had already done all the talking that mattered 3 hours earlier in a conversation with my forensic accountant that had cost me 11,000 naira per hour and was worth every kobo. My name is Obiora. I'm 46 years old. For 9 years, I built Obiora Custom Woodworks from a rented half-plot in Nnewi, Anambra State, into a furniture manufacturing operation that employed 34 people, held supply contracts with 3 hotel chains across the southeast, and generated $187 million in annual revenue. I designed the Ironwood Specification System, a proprietary grading and quality control protocol that classified timber stock across 6 structural categories based on density, moisture content, and grain integrity. And that reduced our material waste rate from 23% to 6.4% over 5 years. I built the Keystone client fulfillment pipeline, a scheduling and delivery tracking process that maintained a 96.1% on-time delivery rate across 840 orders in 2023 alone. I developed the Artisan Progression Matrix, which tracked each carpenter's skill development across 9 competency tiers, from rough cutting to precision joinery to finishing, and which I used to assign projects based on complexity matching so that the right hands shaped the right wood for the right client. I hadn't taken a full weekend off in 4 years. I missed my mother's 70th birthday celebration in our village because a container of kiln-dried Irako was delayed at the one port, and I spent 2 days on the phone with clearing agents negotiating demurrage charges that would have cost $2.3 million if I hadn't intervened personally. My husband, Emeka, stopped asking when I'd be home for dinner sometime around year 6. He started leaving my plate in the microwave with a small note, sometimes Nnewi, eat, sometimes just a drawn heart, and those notes became the most consistent evidence of love in my household, more reliable than my presence, which is a sentence I can write now without flinching but couldn't have said aloud 2 years ago. I was the company. Not metaphorically. Literally. Every supplier relationship ran through my phone. Every quality standard lived in my hands before it lived in any document. Every client trusted Obiora Custom Woodworks because they trusted Adiz Obiora, and the distance between those two things, the company and the person, was a gap I never built a bridge across because I believed the people around me were the bridge. I believed that 9 years of shared meals, shared deadlines, shared sweat in a workshop without reliable air conditioning in Nnewi heat had created something that didn't need a contract to enforce. I believed loyalty was a material as strong as the Irako we shaped. I was wrong about the loyalty. I was right about the Irako. Wood doesn't betray you. People do. The difference between those two materials is what this story is about. The betrayal had a name, a title I had invented for him, and a smile that I now understand was rehearsed. His name was Chukwemeka Dyke. Everyone called him Emeka D. Not to be confused with my husband, a distinction that became darkly ironic given that one Emeka was leaving love notes on my dinner plate while the other was draining my company from the inside. He was 38 years old. I hired him in February 2023 as my operations coordinator, a role I created because the business had outgrown my ability to personally oversee procurement, logistics, and workshop scheduling simultaneously. Emeka D. came recommended by a cousin of a friend of a supplier, which in Southeast Nigeria is considered a reference, and which I accepted because the alternative was a formal recruitment process I didn't have time for. A decision I will regret with mathematical precision for the rest of my professional life. Emeka D's first month was a performance. He reorganized the timber storage yard, which didn't need reorganizing, but which produced visible activity. He created new purchase order forms with his name printed at the bottom in bold, which I found mildly territorial but attributed to enthusiasm. He introduced phrases into our Monday meetings that no one in a woodworking factory had ever used. optimize our throughput verticality, leverage the artisan bandwidth, synergize the supply chain ecosystem. I remember Beo Adeyemi, my finishing specialist, a man of few words and exacting standards who had been with me since year 3, looking at me across the table during one of these speeches with an expression that communicated, in the eloquent silence of a craftsman who works with his hands, something very close to, "This man is talking nonsense." I should have listened to Beo's face. I didn't. I listened to Emeka D's vocabulary and mistook volume for value. What I didn't see, what was happening underneath the reorganized storage yard and the bold-printed purchase orders, was that Emeka D was building a parallel procurement network. Within 3 months, he had introduced 4 new timber suppliers, a hardware vendor, and a finishing materials company. Their names were real. Their invoices were real. Their prices were 35 to 55% above market rate. The difference between what the materials cost and what Obiora Custom Woodworks paid for them was being divided among Emeka D and 3 of my most senior artisans, Uche Nwosu, my lead joiner of 7 years, Kelechi Amadi, my upholstery specialist of 5 years, and Funmi Adebayo, my procurement clerk of 4 years, who processed every inflated invoice with a signature I had authorized her to use because I trusted her. Because she had earned that trust through 4 years of reliable work. Because trust is what you give people who show up every day and do their jobs and look you in the eye and call you Madam Ada with what you believe is respect, but what turns out to be the practiced warmth of someone who is stealing from you systematically. The discovery happened the way discoveries happen when you've built a system designed to catch exactly this kind of discrepancy, quietly, on a Tuesday evening, in the back office, during a routine update of the Ironwood Specification System. I was cross-referencing a delivery of sapele planks against the purchase order and the supplier's quoted price. The invoice said $485,000 for 200 board feet of kiln-dried sapele at $2,425 per board foot. I had been buying sapele from my supplier in Benin City for $1,580 per board foot for 6 years. The math wasn't ambiguous. It was a 53% markup on a single delivery from a supplier called Prestige Timber Solutions that I had never contacted, never visited, and never verified because Emeka D had told me he'd optimized our vendor diversification strategy, and I had let him, because that was his job, because I had hired him to handle exactly this, because I was too busy building the business to watch the person I'd hired to help me build it take it apart. I sat at my desk for a long time after I found it. The workshop was empty. The generators were off. The only sound was the security guard's radio playing flavor from the gate, tinny and distant, and the hum of the inverter keeping my laptop alive. I didn't cry. I didn't call Emeka my husband, the good one. I opened a new spreadsheet. I labeled it Variance Audit Internal. And I began to pull the thread. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever poured years into building something with your own hands only to discover that the people sitting at your table were the ones hollowing it out from underneath, make sure to like and subscribe. I share business strategy and entrepreneurship analysis every week that might change how you protect what you've built. Because what I found over the next 2 weeks wasn't one inflated invoice. It was a network. And what I did about it required the same thing that building Obiora Custom Woodworks had required: patience, precision, and the willingness to cut clean. What Emeka D didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the Ironwood Specification System wasn't just a grading protocol. It was an archive. And I am a woman who archives everything. When I built the system in 2019, I designed it with a feature that no one else in the workshop understood or, frankly, cared about: a historical pricing module. Every timber purchase since January 2019 was logged with supplier name, species, grade, board footage, unit cost, delivery date, and a market benchmark pulled from 3 independent sources: the Benin City Timber Merchants Association Price Index, the Lagos Commodity Board Quarterly Report, and my own supplier quotes, which I collected by calling 4 vendors every quarter and recording their rates in a dedicated tab labeled Market Reference. The system didn't just track what we paid. It tracked what we should have paid. And the gap between those 2 numbers, once I started looking, was a canyon. Over the weekend of October 10th through 12th, 2023, I conducted what I would later describe to my lawyer as a full retrospective procurement audit. I didn't sleep more than 3 hours either night. Emeka, my husband, brought me chin chin and Chapman at midnight on Saturday and didn't ask questions, which is the kind of grace you develop after 9 years of marriage to someone who builds things and occasionally has to take them apart. I cross-referenced every purchase order Emeka D. had processed since February against my historical pricing data, current market rates, and the invoices from his new vendors. I built a separate tab for each: Prestige Timber Solutions, Apex Hardware and Fittings, Crown Finishing Supplies, and a fourth vendor called Southeastern Industrial Materials that I hadn't even noticed until the audit revealed a pattern of small, frequent orders: $45,000 here, $62,000 there, that individually looked routine but collectively amounted to $3.8 million in overpayments across 7 months. By Sunday evening, I had identified 63 fraudulent invoices totaling $27.4 million in overpayments. The legitimate cost of the materials on those invoices was $11.2 million. The difference, $16.2 million, had been extracted from my company by people I had trained, promoted, and, in Uche Nwosu's case, personally driven to the hospital in 2021 when his daughter had a febrile seizure at 2 a.m. and his car wouldn't start. I mention the hospital trip not for sympathy, but because it is a data point in the cost of misplaced trust, and I was now in the business of cataloging data points. I did something else that weekend. On Saturday morning, October 11th, at 7:15 a.m., I drove to a business center on Onitsha Road and made physical copies of every document in the Ironwood system, every invoice, every purchase order, every supplier quote, every delivery receipt. I stored the originals in a fireproof safe I had purchased in August 2023 for $47,000, which I had kept in the boot of my car since the day I bought it, because some part of me, the part that had survived 9 years of building a business in an environment where power supply is unreliable, roads are unpredictable, and the only infrastructure you can truly count on is the one you build yourself. Some part of me had known that a day like this was possible. Not certain. Possible. And I prepare for possibilities the way other people prepare for certainties, thoroughly. I also called my lawyer, Chidinma Ease, on Saturday afternoon. Chidinma had handled the Obiora Custom Woodworks registration in 2015 and had reviewed every major contract since. I told her what I'd found. She asked one question: "Do you have documentation?" I told her I had 5 years of it. She said, "Don't confront anyone. Don't change anything visible. Come to my office Monday morning at 8. I didn't confront anyone. I went to work on Monday, October 13th, and I greeted Uche when he said good morning. I nodded at Kelechi when he showed me an upholstery sample for the Radisson order. I sat through a 15-minute meeting with Emeka D, where he presented what he called a Q4 procurement optimization roadmap that included the phrase vendor ecosystem consolidation for maximum throughput leverage, which was his way of describing the network of shell suppliers he had built to steal from me. I nodded. I took notes. I asked one question about delivery timelines. I went back to my office and added his presentation notes to the variance audit file. They thought I didn't know. For the next 14 days, they continued to think I didn't know, and during those 14 days, for more inflated invoices were submitted totaling $4.1 million in overpayments, which I documented in real time with timestamps, screenshots, and cross-referenced market pricing. I let every single one come through. Because Chidinma had explained something to me that Monday morning that reframed the entire situation. Under Nigerian law, specifically the Advance Fee Fraud and Other Fraud-Related Offenses Act, what Emeka D. and the others were doing constituted criminal fraud, and the more documented instances I had, the stronger the case. So I watched. And I documented. And I waited. 48 hours after I began the silent documentation phase, the first crack appeared, not in the fraud, but in the product. On Wednesday, October 15th, I received a call from Mrs. Ngozi Okonkwo, the procurement manager at Protea Hotels Southeast, our largest client at $42 million annually. Mrs. Okonkwo was a woman who spoke with the directness of someone who had been purchasing furniture for hotel chains for 20 years and had no patience for excuses. Adis, we received the bedroom set samples for the Enugu property renovation, and I'm going to be honest with you, the finish is not right. The lacquer on 2 of the headboards is cloudy. Cloudy, Adis. We've been working together for 5 years, and I have never seen cloudy lacquer from your workshop. I knew why. The finishing materials used on those headboards had come from Crown Finishing Supplies, Emeka DS shell vendor. They were not the German-imported polyurethane lacquer I had been sourcing from my supplier in Lagos for 7 years at $18,500 per liter. They were a domestic substitute, probably purchased for $6,200 per liter and invoiced at $24,000, with a formulation that couldn't withstand the humidity levels in a workshop without climate control in southeast Nigeria. The Ironwood system would have classified the finish as Grade 4, acceptable for utility furniture, unacceptable for hospitality clients. We used Grade 1 for Protea. The difference was visible to anyone who ran their hand across the surface, and Mrs. Okonkwo's team ran their hands across every surface. I told her I would personally oversee replacement samples using verified materials. She thanked me. Then she said, Adis, we've been with you because the quality has been consistent. If that's changing, I need to know now, not after we've installed 200 headboards in a new property. It's not changing, I said. You have my word. I hung up and sat with the weight of that promise. Because keeping it meant confronting the fact that the materials flowing into my workshop were compromised, that the person I'd hired to manage procurement was the person orchestrating the compromise, and that every day I waited was a day my clients received products made from materials I would never have approved. The documentation phase was necessary for the legal case. But it was costing me the thing I had spent 9 years building, the quality guarantee that was the foundation of every client relationship I had. That evening, Emeka D. sent me a WhatsApp message at 8:47 p.m. Madam Ada, just wanted to flag, Crown had a slight batch variation on the last lacquer delivery. Nothing major, just some natural variation in the formulation process. I've already spoken to them about tightening QC on the next shipment. All sorted thumbs up. Natural variation. In lacquer that was a completely different product from what we ordered. From a supplier that existed primarily to inflate invoices. All sorted. I replied, noted. Thank you. 2 words. I was learning that 2 words could carry more weight than 200 when you knew what was underneath them. By the end of the following week, the quality issue had spread. A second client, Transcorp Hotels Calabar, representing $28 million annually, rejected an entire production run of 24 dining tables. Their facilities manager sent a detailed report, uneven stain absorption on the tabletops, visible grain inconsistencies suggesting mixed timber grades within the same batch, and joint gaps on 3 tables exceeding their 0.5 mm tolerance specification. The rejection triggered a contractual penalty of $1.8 million and a mandatory reproduction at our cost, estimated at $4.2 million in materials and labor. Total immediate exposure, $6 million from a single rejected order. The joint gaps were the detail that told me the rot had spread deeper than the supply chain. Joint gaps are a craftsmanship issue, not a materials issue. A gap exceeding 0.5 millimeters on a mortise and tenon joint means the carpenter measuring and cutting that joint was either rushing, distracted, or no longer invested in the precision the work demanded. Uche Wosu had cut those joints. Uche, whose joinery I had personally calibrated over 7 years, whose hands I had trusted with our most demanding clients, was now producing work that failed quality inspection. The fraud hadn't just corrupted the materials. It had corrupted the craft. When you stop caring about the integrity of what goes in, you stop caring about the integrity of what comes out, and the hands follow the conscience. Emeka D. called me on Friday, October 24th at 5:32 p.m. His voice had a tightness that hadn't been there before. Madam Ada, I wanted to loop you in on the Transcorp situation. I've been interfacing with their facilities team to, recalibrate expectations around acceptable variance thresholds. I think we can reframe this as a natural characteristic of handcrafted furniture. Artisanal means variation, right? That's the value proposition. Reframe. Recalibrate expectations. Value proposition. He was trying to convince a five-star hotel chain that paid premium prices for flawless execution that flaws were a feature. Emeka, I said. Yes, madam. The penalty clause in the Transcorp contract specifies zero tolerance for joint gaps exceeding 0.5 millimeters on grade A furniture. Section 7, paragraph 2. There's no narrative that overrides a contractual specification. Silence. Then, right. Okay, I'll review the contract language and get back to you. He wouldn't review it. He hadn't read it. I knew this because I had written that contract, and the version in the company's shared folder was missing the appendix containing the penalty schedule, an appendix that existed only in my personal files and in the executed copy held by Transcorp's legal department. Emeka D. was operating without the full picture because he had never bothered to acquire the full picture. He had acquired a title, a WhatsApp group, and a scheme. The picture was my department. Meanwhile, Chidinma Ease had not been idle. On October 22nd, she engaged a forensic accountant named Obiora Nwankwo, who began a parallel analysis of the shell vendor invoices against actual bank deposits. Obior's preliminary finding, delivered to me on October 27th, was that $9.8 million of the $16.2 million in overpayments had been routed through a single account at a microfinance bank in Onitsha, held in the name of Emeka D's brother. The remaining $6.4 million had been distributed in cash, $3.1 million traced to withdrawals corresponding to payments Uche received outside of payroll, $2.1 million linked to Kelechi through mobile money transfers to his wife's account, and $1.2 million to fund me through a pattern of POS transactions that Obiora was still mapping. 2 weeks into the silent phase, the client losses became impossible to contain. Protea Hotels formally reduced their Q4 order from $42 million to $26 million, citing quality inconsistencies requiring a diversified supplier approach. A $16 million reduction from a client I had personally cultivated for 5 years. Transcorp Hotels Calabar placed their account under review, which in procurement language means they were already talking to competitors. The reproduction for their rejected dining tables was behind schedule because the replacement timber, ordered through my original supplier in Benin City, bypassing Emeka D's shell vendors, was delayed by a logistics issue that Emeka D. had created when he streamlined our transport arrangements in June by switching to a haulage company that turned out to be owned by his cousin. The delay added $890,000 in demurrage and storage fees and pushed the delivery date past Transcorp's renovation deadline, triggering a secondary penalty of $2.4 million. The cumulative financial damage was now quantifiable: $16.2 million in fraudulent overpayments, $6 million in Transcorp rejection costs, $16 million in Protea order reduction, $3.29 million in logistics penalties and fees. Total, $41.49 million. From a company with $187 million in annual revenue. That's 22.2% of our top line, extracted through a combination of theft and incompetence by people who called me Madam Ada and ate jollof rice at my table every Christmas. On October 28th at 6:40 p.m., after the workshop had emptied and the generator had been switched off, I was in my office reviewing the transport documentation when I heard voices from the timber yard. The window was louved and partially open. Emeka D, Uche, Kelechi, and Funmi were standing between stacks of Irako planks, speaking in a mix of English and Igbo that carried clearly in the evening air. Emeka D, she's not going to find anything. She stepped back from procurement. That was the whole point of bringing me in. Uche, the Transcorp thing is a problem. She's asking about the joints. She's asking about the timber grades. Funmi, I told you the crown lacquer wouldn't pass on hotel work. I said that in August. Emeka D, it passed on everything else. We just rotate the good stock into the high visibility orders and use the other suppliers for volume work. She won't inspect every piece. Uche, She inspects everything. Emeka D, she used to inspect everything. She has me handling it now. That's the arrangement. I stood at my window for 2 minutes. I didn't record it, though I could have. I went back to my desk. I wrote down every word, timestamped it, and added it to the variance audit file. Then I called Chidinma. I have the conversation, I said. How much? Enough. Emeka confirmed the scheme is deliberate. Uche confirmed awareness. Funmi confirmed she knew the materials were substandard. Come in tomorrow morning. Bring everything. Before I tell you what happened next, you might be wondering something I wondered too, standing at that window with sawdust still on my shoes and the evening heat pressing against the louvres. How do you fire people you trained with your own hands? How do you dismantle a team you built from nothing in a country where madam means family and employment means survival? How do you protect the thing you love by cutting away the people who helped you build it? If you've ever faced that question in a business, a family, a partnership, make sure you're subscribed because the answer isn't simple and it isn't clean, and it's exactly what I'll walk you through next. 3 weeks in, I walked into Chidinma Ease's office with a banker's box containing 214 pages of documentation, a USB drive with the complete Ironwood Specification System including 5 years of historical pricing data, and Obiora Nwankwo's forensic accounting report that traced $16.2 million in fraudulent overpayments to 4 individuals, a microfinance bank account in Onitsha held by Emeka D's brother, and a pattern of cash withdrawals and mobile money transfers that corresponded to payroll payments to Uche Nwosu, Kelechi Amadi, and Funmi Adebayo. Chidinma looked at the box, then at me, and said, "You could have been a prosecutor." I said. For 9 years. I just didn't have a law degree. The meeting lasted 3 hours. Chidinma laid out the options with the precision I had come to expect from a woman who charged $85,000 per hour and was worth every naira. Criminal complaint to the Nigeria Police Force Economic and Financial Crimes Unit under the Advance Fee Fraud and Other Fraud-Related Offenses Act, which carried penalties of up to 7 years imprisonment. Civil suit for recovery of stolen funds plus damages, immediate termination of all 4 employees for gross misconduct, forfeiting any severance or accrued benefits under their employment agreements, and a 4th option she mentioned with the professional obligation of someone who must present all alternatives, do nothing, absorb the losses, restructure quietly. She mentioned it because lawyers are thorough. She knew I wouldn't take it. I knew I wouldn't take it. $41.49 million in cumulative damage wasn't an amount you absorbed quietly. It was an amount that, left unaddressed, would kill the company within 12 months. But before I could act on any of it, the situation escalated on its own. On November 1st, Protea Hotels Southeast sent a formal letter, not an email, not a phone call, a letter on headed paper delivered by courier, notifying Obiora Custom Woodworks that they were initiating a competitive tender process for their 2024 furniture supply contract. The letter cited persistent quality inconsistencies and delivery reliability concerns and invited us to participate in the tender alongside 3 other suppliers. 5 years of exclusive supply, $42 million annually, reduced to a competitive bid against companies I had spent a decade outperforming. The letter was signed by Mrs. Okonkwo's director, which meant the decision had moved above her. She called me that afternoon, and her voice carried the particular strain of someone delivering bad news to a person they respect. "Adiz, I fought for you. I want you to know that. But the headboard issue and the delivery delays, it went to the regional director. My hands are tied. I understand, Ngozi. Thank you for telling me directly. Can you win the tender?" "I can. But I shouldn't have to." "No, you shouldn't have." That same week, Transcorp Hotels Calabar formally terminated their contract. Not suspended. Terminated. The penalty for the rejected dining tables, combined with the missed renovation deadline, had triggered a termination clause I had written into the contract myself, Section 14, Paragraph 3, allowing either party to terminate with immediate effect following 2 consecutive delivery failures within a 90-day period. The irony of being destroyed by my own contractual precision was not lost on me. It was, in fact, the kind of detail that would have made me laugh if the financial consequence hadn't been $28 million in annual revenue walking out the door. Total client losses now stood at $44 million annually, Protea's full contract at risk, and Transcorp gone entirely. Combined with the $16.2 million in direct fraud losses and $9.29 million in penalties and fees, the total damage to Obiora Custom Woodworks had reached $69.49 million. From a $187 million company. That's 37.2% of annual revenue, and the number was still climbing. On November 3rd, Emeka D. did something I hadn't anticipated, which I mentioned because it was one of the very few moments in this entire sequence where he surprised me. He hired a lawyer. Not a good one, a man named Chidi Okaro who operated out of a two-room office on New Market Road and who, I would later learn, had been suspended from the Nigerian Bar Association for 6 months in 2019 for professional misconduct. But a lawyer nonetheless. Chidi Okoro sent Chidinma a letter alleging that my hostile work environment and systematic exclusion of Mr. Dyke from key operational decisions constituted constructive dismissal and that Emeka D. intended to pursue a claim for $15 million in damages, lost earnings, and reputational harm. Chidinma called me after receiving the letter. She was laughing. Not loudly, Chidinma doesn't do anything loudly, but with the quiet amusement of a professional encountering work product that falls below the minimum threshold of competence. He's claiming constructive dismissal, she said, while simultaneously still employed by you, while actively defrauding you. His lawyer either doesn't know about the fraud or doesn't care, and I'm not sure which is worse. What do? We do what we were going to do. The letter changes nothing. If anything, it accelerates the timeline, because now he's created a paper trail of his own that we can use to demonstrate consciousness of guilt. He's lawyering up before he's been accused of anything. Innocent people don't do that. Noted. Adiz, it's time. You've documented enough. The forensic report is complete. The client damage is mounting daily. Every day those 4 people remain in your workshop is a day your company loses value. We file the criminal complaint Monday. We terminate Tuesday. Monday, I said. File Monday. By week 5, the workshop had become a place I barely recognized. Production efficiency had dropped 31% since October, measured by the Artisan Progression Matrix that I had built to track exactly this kind of decline. 3 active orders were behind schedule. The Keystone client fulfillment pipeline showed red flags on 7 of 12 pending deliveries. 2 junior artisans, good workers, uninvolved in the fraud, had quietly begun looking for other positions, which I knew because one of them, a young man named Chinedu who had been with me for 2 years, came to my office and told me directly, "Madam Ada, I don't know what's happening, but the workshop doesn't feel right. Uche is distracted. The materials are different. I'm not comfortable putting my name on work that doesn't meet the standard you taught me. Chinedu, I hear you. Give me 1 week. 1 week. 1 week. And the workshop will feel like yours again." He nodded. He didn't fully believe me. But he gave me the week, which was more than I deserved from a 24-year-old artisan who had no obligation to trust a process he couldn't see. On November 7th, Emeka D. came to my office for the last time as an employee of Obiora Custom Woodworks. He didn't know it was the last time. He sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair where I had interviewed him 9 months earlier, when he had worn a press shirt and spoken about operational excellence and supply chain innovation, and I had thought, this man has energy. This man has ideas. This man might be the person who helps me scale, and he said something that, in retrospect, was the most honest thing he ever said to me. "Madam Ada, I think we have a problem." "What kind of problem, Emeka?" "The clients. Protea, Transcorp. The quality issues. I think maybe some of the new vendors aren't performing at the level we need. I've been reviewing the invoices, and I think we might need to go back to some of the original suppliers. The ones you used before I came." He was offering to dismantle his own scheme. Not out of guilt. I could see that clearly in his face, which wore the expression of a man performing concern rather than feeling it, but out of self-preservation. The quality failures were becoming visible. The client losses were becoming undeniable. He was trying to reverse course before the trail led back to him, not understanding that the trail had been mapped, measured, and documented weeks ago by a woman who had been tracking procurement data since before he learned to spell throughput. That's an interesting observation, Emeka. I just want what's best for the company, madam. I know exactly what you want. He looked at me. Something shifted behind his eyes, not recognition, not yet, but the faint, animal awareness that the room had changed temperature, and he didn't know why. I'll review the vendor contracts this weekend, he said, standing. You won't need to, I said. He left. I watched him walk across the workshop floor, past Bayo Adeyemi's finishing station, Bayo, who had looked at me across the Monday meeting table all those months ago with the silent eloquence of a man who knew nonsense when he heard it, and out the side door to the parking area. I heard his car start. A Toyota Camry, 2018 model, purchased 3 months after he joined my company with cash that I now knew the origin of. The following Monday, November 11th, I arrived at the workshop at 5:45 a.m. The security guard, Musa, looked surprised to see me that early. I told him I had paperwork. I did. For termination letters, prepared by Nnewi, printed on Obiora Custom Woodworks letterhead, each one referencing specific invoice numbers, dates, amounts, vendor names, and the forensic evidence connecting the named individual to the fraud scheme. They were not vague. They were not emotional. They were documents, and documents are what I do. I place 4 envelopes on 4 workstations. I changed the passwords on every company account, the supplier portal, the banking platform, the shared drive, the Ironwood system. I removed Emeka DS access credentials from the security system. I moved the backup of the Ironwood Specification System to a new encrypted location. Then I made coffee, Nescafe, 3 sugars, the way I've taken it since university, and I sat in my office and waited for the workshop to fill. Bayo arrived first at 7:10 a.m. He saw the envelopes. He looked at me through the glass partition. He didn't say anything. He went to his station and began preparing his finishing materials with the unhurried precision of a man who understood that the day was going to be significant and that his job was to be steady through it. Emeka D. arrived at 8:20. He saw the envelope. He opened it standing at his desk, the way people open things they don't expect to be important. I watched his face through the glass. It went through 3 phases in approximately 30 seconds. Confusion as he read the first paragraph, stillness as he reached the section listing the specific invoices and amounts, and then a rapid, visible calculation, his eyes moving left to right. His jaw tightening as he understood that the letter contained not accusations but evidence. Accusations can be denied. Evidence requires a different strategy, and I could see him searching for one in real time. He came to my office. He didn't knock. Madam Ada, this is a misunderstanding. These vendors, the pricing, it's market dynamics. Timber prices fluctuate. You know this. The Southeast market has been volatile since. Emeka, the forensic accountant, has traced $9.8 million from the shell vendor accounts to your brother's microfinance bank account in Onitsha. The Nigeria Police Force Economic and Financial Crimes Unit received the complaint last Friday. This isn't a conversation about timber prices. It's a notification of termination for gross misconduct. Your personal belongings will be available for collection after 5 p.m. today. He stared at me. His hands were flat on my desk, and I could see the slight tremor in his left wrist, the involuntary betrayal of a body that understood the situation faster than the mind controlling it. You can't all sue. Wrongful termination. Constructive dismissal. My lawyer has already. Your lawyer sent a constructive dismissal claim on behalf of a man who is currently employed and actively committing fraud against his employer. Nnewi is available if Mr. Okoro wants to discuss the documentation. What documentation? All of it, Emeka. Every invoice. Every purchase order. Every pricing discrepancy. Every bank deposit. 5 years of cost tracking data that you never knew existed because you never asked what systems were already in place before you arrived. You walked into a company with a 9-year paper trail and assumed no one was keeping records. The sentence landed the way I intended it to, not as an attack, but as a fact. delivered with the same calm I used when explaining timber grades to a new apprentice. This is Irako. This is sapele. This is what happens when you steal from a woman who built her own accounting system on a Tuesday evening in 2019 because she didn't trust anyone else to do it accurately. He left. He didn't say goodbye. He walked to his Camry and drove out of the compound, and the security barrier closed behind him with a mechanical sound that I found, in that moment, deeply satisfying. Not vengeful. Satisfying. The way closing a well-made drawer is satisfying, the precise click of something fitting exactly where it should. Uche arrived at 8:35. He saw the envelope. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at me through the glass, and there was a moment between us that contained 7 years of early mornings and late deliveries, and the particular intimacy of two people who have shaped wood in the same room until their hands carried the same calluses. Then he opened it, and he sat on his stool, and he was quiet for a long time. He came to my door at 9:15. He knocked. "Madam Ada, I understand. I'm not going to fight it. I want you to know, the joinery, the work, that was always real. The rest of it, I got pulled into something I should have walked away from. But the craft was real. I know the craft was real, Uche. That's what makes this worse." He nodded. He collected his personal tools, the chisels his father had given him, the marking gauge he'd bought in Onitsha with his first month's salary from my workshop, and he left through the back gate. I heard his motorcycle start in the lane, and then it was quiet. Kelechi came in at 9 o'clock and read his letter without visible reaction. He placed it back in the envelope, collected his upholstery tools, and left without speaking to anyone. His face was blank in a way that I recognized as the expression of a person who had been expecting this and had already rehearsed the departure. He had known. They had all known it was a matter of time. The difference between us was that I had used the time to build a case, and they had used it to hope I wouldn't. Funmi didn't come in. She called at 10:15 a.m. and spoke to me for less than a minute. She said, "I knew this was coming." I said, "Then you understand." She said, "Yes, madam." And that was the end of a 4-year working relationship that had once involved me spending 3 weekends teaching her to use the Ironwood system, because I believed she had the analytical mind for it, which she did. She simply applied it to the wrong purpose. By noon on November 11th, I had terminated 4 of my 34 employees, filed a criminal fraud complaint with the Economic and Financial Crimes Unit, and begun the process of rebuilding my supply chain, my production schedule, and my client relationships from a position that felt less like victory and more like surgery. The workshop was quieter with 4 empty stations. Not peaceful. There is a difference between quiet and peaceful that you learn when the quiet is the result of cutting rather than rest. I held a meeting at 1 p.m. brief, factual, no drama. I told the remaining 30 employees that 4 colleagues had been terminated for financial misconduct, that the matter was being handled legally, and that operations would continue without interruption. I told them their jobs were secure, their work was valued, and anyone with concerns could speak to me directly. I did not name names. I did not provide details. In a 34-person workshop, 4 empty stations are their own announcement. Beo stayed after the meeting. He stood at the door of my office with his arms crossed and sawdust on his apron and said, in the fewest words possible, "I knew about the vendors. I should have told you sooner." Why didn't you? Because Emeka was management. And Uche was senior to me. And I thought maybe you already knew and were handling it. I was handling it, but not because I already knew. I'm sorry, Madam Ada. Don't be sorry, Beo. Be the person who tells me next time. He nodded once, went back to his station, and began sanding a tabletop for the Protea replacement order with the steady, circular motion that I had watched him perform 10,000 times over 6 years. The sound of sandpaper on wood was the first normal sound I had heard in that workshop in weeks, and I sat in my office and listened to it the way you listen to rain after a long dry season, not because it fixes anything, but because it tells you the world is still working the way it's supposed to. The legal aftermath moved with the grinding, methodical pace of Nigerian institutional process, which is to say it moved slowly, but it moved. The Economic and Financial Crimes Unit opened a formal investigation in December 2023. Emeka D. was arrested on January 14, 2024, at his brother's house in Onitsha, where he had been staying since the termination. He was charged with criminal breach of trust and fraud under the Criminal Code Act, carrying a potential sentence of 7 years. His lawyer, Chidi Okaro, the same man who had sent the constructive dismissal letter, attempted to negotiate a plea arrangement in February, arguing that Emeka D had been a coordinator, not the sole architect of the scheme, which was legally creative but factually irrelevant given that the forensic evidence showed $9.8 million flowing directly through his brother's account. The magistrate denied bail twice before granting it in March at $5 million with a surety. As of the time I'm telling this story, the case is still proceeding through the courts. Nigerian justice is not fast, but it is, when properly documented, thorough. Uche Nwosu cooperated with the investigation. He provided a statement to the EFCC detailing the structure of the scheme, how Emeka D had recruited him with the promise of $200,000 monthly in supplementary income, how the shell vendors were set up, how the invoices were inflated. His cooperation was genuine if late. He was charged with the same offenses, but his lawyer successfully argued for reduced charges based on his cooperation and secondary role. He received a suspended sentence and a restitution order of $3.1 million. I did not attend his hearing. The outcome was sufficient without the spectacle. Kelechi Amadi left Nnewi. I heard through the Artisan Network, which in Southeast Nigeria functions as both professional directory and informal intelligence service, that he moved to Lagos and was doing upholstery work for a furniture retailer in Lekki. Not custom work. Not the kind of work that requires the skill set I spent 5 years developing in him. Production work. I don't know if that's a step down or a lateral move or simply a different life, and I've decided it's not my business to categorize. Funmi Adebayo's charges were reduced after her lawyer demonstrated that her financial involvement was the smallest of the four and that she had been, in the EFCC's language, a facilitating participant rather than a principal actor. She received a fine of $500,000 and a restitution order of $1.2 million. Whether I would ever collect the full restitution from any of them was a separate question. Restitution orders and actual payments are different things, and the difference is measured in years and patience and the solvency of people who spent their stolen money as fast as they received it. Total restitution ordered across all four, $16.2 million, the exact amount identified in Obiora Nwankwo's forensic report. The symmetry was satisfying in the way that balanced accounts are satisfying to a person who has spent 9 years making numbers align. A year later, Obiora Custom Woodworks posted annual revenue of $214 million, a 14.4% increase over the year the fraud occurred. The growth wasn't despite the crisis. It was, in measurable part, because of it. The forced restructuring eliminated $16.2 million in annual leakage. The return to my original suppliers restored the material quality that had built every client relationship I had. The Protea Hotels tender? I won it. Not because of sentiment or loyalty. Mrs. Okonkwo's director didn't care about our history, but because the replacement samples I submitted in December 2023 were flawless. Grade 1 finish. 0 joint gaps. Delivered 3 days ahead of schedule. The new contract was worth $48 million annually, a $6 million increase over the previous arrangement, because I had used the tender process to renegotiate terms that reflected the actual value of what we produced. Transcorp Hotels Calabar re-engaged in Q2 2024 after their alternative supplier delivered furniture, with veneer delamination on the first order. Sandra, their facilities manager, called me and said, "We made a mistake." I said, "You made a decision based on available information. The information has changed." The new contract was $31 million annually. I implemented 4 changes that I should have implemented years earlier. First, a dual authorization system for all vendor contracts and purchase orders exceeding $100,000, requiring my signature and the signature of a second designated employee, Bayo Adeyemi, who had earned the responsibility by being the person who stayed and the person who told me the truth, even if he told it late. Second, a quarterly external audit of all supplier invoices against market benchmarks, conducted by Obiora Custom firm at $1.2 million per year. A number that sounds expensive until you compare it to $16.2 million. Third, I retired the manual version of the Ironwood Specification System and migrated it to a cloud-based platform that 3 people could access, monitor, and verify simultaneously. The original system had saved me. But it had also been a single point of knowledge, and single points of knowledge are vulnerabilities, even when the person holding them is trustworthy. Especially then. Fourth, I created a formal artisan employment agreement with explicit clauses on conflict of interest, vendor relationships, and financial misconduct, reviewed and signed annually by every employee. The agreement wasn't about distrust. It was about clarity. Trust without structure isn't loyalty. It's exposure. Nnewi was promoted to workshop supervisor, a role I created for him, with a 28% salary increase and oversight of quality assurance for all Tier 1 client orders. He took to it with the quiet authority of a man who had always led by example and now had the title to match. Raphael, I hired 6 new artisans over the following year, each trained personally by me using the same methods I had used with Uche, the joinery techniques, the grading system, the finishing standards. The difference was that this time, I also trained them on the systems. The Ironwood platform, the dual authorization process, the audit schedule. I taught them the craft and the controls, because craft without controls is a beautiful thing that someone will eventually exploit. Nnewi, the young artisan who had come to my office and told me the workshop didn't feel right, was promoted to senior artisan within 8 months. His instinct for quality, the same instinct that had made him uncomfortable when the standard slipped, made him one of the most reliable craftsmen in the workshop. I gave him a 35% raise and told him that the week he had given me, the 1 week of trust when I asked him to wait, had mattered more than he knew. He said, "Madam Ada, I just didn't want to make bad furniture." Which is, when you strip away everything else, the entire philosophy of Obiora Custom Woodworks in 8 words. Emeka, my husband, the one who left notes on my dinner plate, and I took a weekend trip to Calabar in March 2024. A full weekend. Friday evening to Sunday afternoon. No laptop. No supplier calls. No invoices. We ate pepper soup at a waterfront restaurant and he said, "You look different." I said, "Different how?" He said, "Like you put something down." He was right. I had put something down. Not the business, never the business, but the weight of carrying it alone while pretending that the people carrying it with me were carrying their share. The loneliest part of the fraud wasn't the betrayal. It was the realization that I had been alone in my own company for months before I knew it, surrounded by people who had stopped building and started taking, and the only thing that had kept the structure standing was the foundation I had poured by myself. In the years before any of them arrived. Emeka Diaz's last known occupation, according to information that reached me through channels I won't specify, was selling building materials at a shop in Onitsha owned by an uncle. Not managing. Selling. Standing behind a counter measuring cement and roofing sheets for customers who would never know that the man handing them their receipt had once sat in a Monday morning meeting and used the phrase, vendor ecosystem consolidation for maximum throughput leverage, with a straight face. I mention this not to gloat. I mention it because it is a data point, and I am a woman who records data points. Here's what I know, and it's specific to the story, so take it or leave it. I built Obiora Custom Woodworks with my hands, my time, my knowledge, and my trust. I shared that trust freely with people I believed had earned it through years of shared work in a workshop where the heat was relentless and the power supply was unreliable, and the only thing you could truly count on was the person standing next to you at the bench. For if those people used the access I gave them to steal from me, not impulsively, not desperately, but systematically over 9 months, while calling me Madam Ada and eating jollof rice at my Christmas table. The thing that saved me wasn't suspicion or paranoia or some innate distrust of human nature. It was a system. A cost-tracking system built on a Tuesday evening in 2019, maintained through 5 years of Friday night updates, and activated by a single invoice for sapele planks that was 53% above market rate. The fraud cost me $69.49 million in direct and indirect losses. The system cost me nothing but time and discipline. The lesson is not that you shouldn't trust people. The lesson is that trust is not a substitute for systems, and systems are not a substitute for attention, and attention is the thing that separates the people who get stolen from once from the people who get stolen from until there's nothing left to take. If you've ever built something with your own hands and discovered that the people you trusted most were the ones dismantling it from the inside, if you've ever had to choose between loyalty and survival and learned that they were never the same thing, I hope this story shows you that the hardest decisions are also the clearest ones, once you have the documentation to back them up. I share business strategy and entrepreneurship analysis every week that helps you build the systems that protect what you've created. Like and subscribe if you found value here. Remember, you can teach anyone a skill. You can share your knowledge, your methods, your craft. But you cannot give anyone your vigilance. And the moment you stop watching, the invoices will tell you exactly who is worth trusting and who is waiting for you to look away.